Mike, Chevy spoke very briefly off the top. We heard his announcement. You were there. Did you talk to the general manager or the head coach? And what did you get from those guys on both today's announcement, this decision, and anything else that might be of interest to everyone joining us on Winnipeg Sports Talk?
Yeah, I mean, naturally, so the focus, of course, was very heavily on Adam Lowry, and there were a few questions, specifically to Kevin Cheveldayoff, about Connor Hellebuyck and Mark Scheifele. And, you know, it's interesting that he says,
I'm asking him to think on parallel tracks here, and the parallel track that is the number one with the freight train on it is win. And that's what we're all about.
Said that recently again to Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuyck.
What I stressed to their representatives and what I stressed to Mark when I had that, and I'll do the same with Connor when I see him, is that we're here to win. You know, we'll take the contract side of things and we'll put it off to the side here. We'll have whatever discussions we need to have or can have or will have. But the focus is winning. We made the trade with the premise in mind that we were going to add some good players to our lineup, give us some depth and dimension. I think in the choices that the coaches have on how to implement. But make no question about it, we're here to try to win.
But he certainly continued to leave the door open for ongoing contract discussions. But it really does sound, Huss, like the Jets are going to try and just focus on what they have right now. I guess see what it looks like, get the season going, and then cross that bridge, however perilous that bridge might ultimately be, when they have to. And, if you're looking at deadlines, certainly the trade deadline, which I believe just got set late last week, I think March the 8th is the trade deadline. The Jets will actually be in Seattle that night, starting off a back-to-back in Seattle and Vancouver. So they'll be on the West Coast. So if you're looking at kind of a deadline, I guess March 8th is the next real deadline. A lot of us thought this summer was the deadline, but they've moved the goalposts. And of course, the real ultimate deadline is July 1st, aka when these guys would be free to sign with any other team and the Jets get nothing back. But, again, the door's not closed clearly. Certainly there's some reports out there that would suggest Hellebuyck himself and Mark Scheifele are potentially open to hearing what Kevin Cheveldayoff is trying to sell.
Do we know whether they've ever tried to sell Scheifele on an extension? Like, that's the one thing I've never heard. Yeah. Obviously, they got into pretty deep conversations with Hellebuyck or made that attempt. I haven't heard the same with 55.
I don't believe they have. But that being said, and this has been made clear to me on numerous occasions this summer by people around the team. Mark Scheifele has never once said, "Get me out of here. I want to trade." Now, he maybe also hasn't come out flat out and said, "I want to finish my career here." And so, maybe the messaging is a little murky. But yeah, I think whereas the ball is, or the puck is very much in Connor Hellebuyck's court or crease, I guess, if we're talking hockey and pucks, the puck is very much in Connor Hellebuyck's crease. No doubt about it in terms of how this plays out. I'm not so sure where the puck is when it comes to Mark Scheifele. Is it in the Jets' crease? Is it in Scheifele's? Is it at center ice, in the neutral zone, somewhere in between them? I tend to say, I would, if I had to say, I would say it's a little more in the middle when it comes to Scheifele, and there remains maybe a feeling out going on. No doors have been slammed shut in either direction, but certainly it doesn't appear, Huss, that there's a game of chicken being played here, where they're at an impasse, if you will, on numbers or things like that. That's not the vibe at all. Just got the sense from Kevin Cheveldayoff today that they're not really sweating it right now. A lot of people outside the organization would say, well, how can that be? They should be sweating buckets.
This does happen all the time. This is not the first time a team, has had a couple guys on expiring contracts, key players going in. In fact, I mean, you look at what the Bruins had last year, knowing that was the case. Although the one thing that sort of stands out to me, it's funny, Remus brought this up yesterday, and I mean, yeah, listen, we've been talking about this stuff all summer because, I mean, very reputable people have been talking about all of these players. Those two in particular were very much up in trade discussions in and around it. Right. Now, what happened to the markets for those players? Unique situations, I guess, on both. But the bottom line is, Mike, this kind of reminds me of the 2015 season when the Winnipeg Jets were playing things out. They had Andrew Ladd's contract that was coming up, and they had Dustin Byfuglien, and they needed to figure it out. And obviously, they didn't end up signing a deal with Andrew Ladd, whether that was something that he turned down. And hey, he did okay. He got that deal with the New York Islanders that took care of him. And then obviously they signed Buff. But things do happen through the year. And like the Winnipeg Jets at that point, when they weren't signing Andrew Ladd, they pivoted, got a first-round pick and a player that came over in a deal with Chicago. So the fact of the matter is, though, that, for everyone, and I did think that there was a pretty good chance that we would have some clarity on both of these situations. That is not the case, but maybe that's just good for people like us in this business, because it certainly gives us lots to talk about in addition to the ups and downs of the daily grind of the 82-game season. Yeah,
and I mean, we had talked about the Jets kind of having to pick a lane, right? Being at the proverbial crossroads maybe this summer. And yet here we are, we're a week or so out from training camp, and maybe that direction still is a bit unclear. The Jets, they're kind of they're straddling multiple lanes right now. And maybe ultimately what will decide the direction is how this team comes out of the gate. They come out playing really well, playing the way clearly Rick Bowness, Kevin Cheveldayoff, and a lot of players believe they can play. Then maybe this, becomes almost much ado about nothing. Because maybe Connor Hellebuyck looks around the landscape and says, you know what? The grass isn't greener outside of Winnipeg. It's pretty green here right now. And in terms of green, they're going to pay me a lot of money to stick around. So, I guess winning tends to breed success and breed confidence. And if you're the Winnipeg Jets and you're certainly trying to produce a winning team this year, that's what you're marketing to your fan base. That's what you're asking people to invest in, to rally around. Certainly having Connor Hellebuyck and Mark Scheifele on expiring deals, wanting to come out and prove themselves, and not just to the Jets, but potentially 31 other teams that might be their next employer, has the opportunity to really benefit the Jets. And so they kick the problem, if you will, a little further down the road, get a few more months maybe to talk about it. And like I said, they'll apparently cross that bridge when they come to it. Does that mean that, Boston Bruins could call up Kevin Cheveldayoff tomorrow, Don Sweeney, and make him an offer he can't refuse? Or the New Jersey Devils, when it comes to Connor Hellebuyck, or the Buffalo Sabres? Sure, anything's possible. But again, Kevin Cheveldayoff doesn't panic, and he doesn't let us see him sweat, at least publicly. And so today, again, we didn't talk to him at length. I suspect next week we'll get into this in even more detail. There'll no doubt be follow-up questions. Today, I would say it was more just a cursory kind of broaching of the subject, the elephant in the room. So maybe we'll get a little more insight into it next week.
Well, listen, the one thing that I don't think anyone can dispute is that the Winnipeg Jets are one of the most fascinating teams coming into this season. And to your point, Mike, like the first 25 games of this year could absolutely shape which side of the fork in the road that they go down. Like, if this team has a great start, if what happened last year happens again this season, right, I think it's game on for this year. And I think you're probably talking about an extension, or hopefully revisiting it with Hellebuyck. Yeah. And I mean, for Mark, listen, he had that great start last year and things were going so well and he scored all those goals. And then obviously we kind of ended up back where we were the season before. at the end with some obvious conflict with the coach and all of that. I mean, if they can get past that and he can embrace the challenge for him right now to not only, I mean, listen, I think there is, to use your point, I mean, sort of prove, it's hard to imagine guys need to prove themselves. A guy that scored 42 goals last year, and I think Mark needs to prove themselves maybe in some other ways. Everyone knows the guy can score goals. Everyone knows they can provide offense. That being said, that's what a lot of teams are looking for.
Yeah.
And Hellebuyck on the other side. But, I mean, to me, that period from the 11th of October in Calgary to American Thanksgiving, the beginning of December or so, I think in a lot of ways is going to sort of, you know, push Kevin Cheveldayoff in one direction or the other. I was on a show out of the market a couple days ago, and they were asking me, so like, what's the outlook for the Winnipeg Jets? Like, where will they be? And I said, guys, I could give you scenarios anywhere from being 5th or 6th in the league to like 30th. Right. I mean, there is a huge range, I would say, of possibilities, which makes it that much more interesting. But I think, to your point, Mike, makes the first part of this season incredibly crucial when it comes to the eventual decisions that inevitably are going to have to be made one way or the other, regardless of how it shakes out.
And that's why, you know, going back to Adam Lowry and the captaincy, I think it was important that the Jets got that settled. They couldn't go into a second year without a captain, especially a year like this. They needed some certainty. They needed a level of calm. And I think Adam Lowry brings all of that and many other intangibles. And, you know, it's funny, Huss, you think about Adam Lowry, where he was a year and a half ago. This is a guy, didn't have a letter on his sweater, and it had nothing to do with him personally. His dad was the interim coach of the Jets. The Jets were a dysfunctional mess. And his dad was tasked with taking over mid-season for Paul Maurice, which, you know, that probably was hardest on Adam Lowry. Adam's never totally opened up about that, but I will say this, Dave Lowry opened up last year to me in Seattle. I had a great one-on-one with him early in the season on a Jets trip to Seattle, and Dave Lowry flat out told me that it was a huge issue for Adam. It came between them as a family. He said it didn't allow Adam to kind of have his voice. And in a way, Dave Lowry not being brought back by the Jets has kind of ushered in this string of developments. Adam, you know, Blake Wheeler has the C removed. Adam Lowry's the guy who officially joins the leadership group as a third A. And now here we are, one training camp later, and he's now the captain and the guy that is going to try and carry this team into the coming year and beyond. And yeah, I mean, I think it was important that the Jets got this right, and I think they absolutely did. And I think it was important that the Jets address this early, and they did that as well. Just as Adam Lowry checks off all the boxes, the Jets checked off a lot of important boxes as well. As they now get set for what will be a very important and interesting training camp. And as you say, a fascinating start to the regular season that in a lot of ways is going to, you know, dictate maybe which direction this team ultimately goes.
Yeah. You know what? Yeah. You just mentioned that 2 seasons ago. I mean, that was insane for, I mean, listen, it really did suck for Adam. And I mean, you felt for him. I mean, and in some ways I felt for Dave too. I mean, it was just such a weird, bizarre setup for professional sports in this age. And yes, it was forced by Maurice quitting basically out of the blue and walking away. But I mean, you do wonder, yeah, I mean, again, we don't need to freaking go back to 2 years ago over and over again. But I will say this, that I mean, it deep sixed the entire season. And I think it took a lot of work for Bowness to come out.